Okay, so today I want to talk to you about browsing in anonymous mode. This is just basically another approach that you can use to browse in some way that allows you to protect the privacy of your information. So we talk about what anonymous browsing is, and then we talk about Tor, which is basically an application that allows you to browse in anonymous mode. And then we look at what you should do, what you should try to avoid, because Tor does not protect you from everything. Browsing in anonymous mode is basically the idea of trying to keep the activities that you are carrying out online private. And unfortunately, the idea of browsing in anonymous mode has come to have a bad name because people tend to use these platforms to also break laws. And so the state or the state security agencies are suspicious if you're wanting to browse in anonymous mode. But you can browse in anonymous mode and do good things. Edward Snowden, you've heard about the Snowden period, the Snowden issue that led to, for example, the leakage of information of people whom the NSA is targeting based on their use of Tor. And what is also interesting to note is that they are not just looking at people who are using Tor, but also people who are associated to these people and people who might be likely, based on their behavior, to use platforms such as Tor to try to protect their privacy. And the reason that this is happening is because, as I said, anonymous browsers are used also by people who are wanting to do bad things. A good book to read is the one by Glenn Greenwald, which talks about basically all of the issues or all of the hypotheses that Edward Snowden raised when he leaked the information about the people that were being targeted by the NSA. Tor is basically just a network of volunteer-operated servers, and it allows users who are wanting to use the Tor network to have improved privacy and security just because of everything else that I've talked about in the previous lectures in terms of revealing personal information when you have discussions and interactions online. And basically what you want to do is to be on some platform that allows you to have the discussion freely. So basically the idea is that rather than making a direct connection, so saying, for example, I am computer A, I want to send a message to computer B directly, what happens is that you will use some sort of convoluted mechanism to allow you to send the message from your computer to computer B without it being traceable that the computer of origin from which the message came was actually the one that you are seated at. But the information about the fact that the message is coming from you will be kept intact. Organizations and users who want to share information on these platforms without compromising privacy are typically interested in using Tor. So you see, for example, cases of individuals or journalists who are trying to communicate information that is secret or that is sensitive or that is censored, and to be able to communicate this in some private way without being discovered. So how Tor works? Tor is basically operates a little bit like an onion of routing strategies. So in terms of layers of secrecy, which we talk about a little bit more in depth. But I would like you to keep the picture of an onion in mind and to think about the fact that when a message is conveyed from one computer to the next, what happens is that a path or a route needs to be discovered or found in order to allow computer, for example, A, to convey a message to computer B through the whole network of computers that we have, for example, available on the internet. The notion of routing or onion, of having an onion style of routing, is that your data is encrypted in progressive layers, pretty much as an onion is structured, so with the core progressively with layers of fruit flesh around that core, building up to form some sort of wrapping or packaging over the core data that you have. Okay, and so because of this concept, what we are basically doing is to relay information through multiple computers that are going to be progressively packaging the data in more and more wrapping until it gets to the final destination where the whole package is unwrapped and then delivered to the destination. So it's a little bit like a twisted route to avoid traceability. So you think about the spy movies that you watch where, for example, somebody takes a convoluted path in order to get to some destination and in order to lose the trackers that are perhaps following him or her. Okay. If you're going to want to use Tor, the easiest way to do this is to get the Tor browser bundle. So pretty much Googling or looking on any search engine should allow you to find a link to the Tor project. And then what you want to do is basically to download your Tor browser. You have all the information which tells you about Tor, and usually you can just connect and configure the browser, your browser, to work with Tor. However, if your connection is censored, filtered, or proxied, this might be difficult to do. We talk about a little bit some workaround mechanism that you can use to install Tor. Be aware that because of the way Tor operates, it might violate, for example, internet browsing policies that you have at work or in other public networks. So you typically want to use this on some private computer, and this also translates to the fact that if you're wanting to be sharing private information, you want to try to use a computing system that you're sure of. Okay. What you want to do is that once you have done this, once you have pretty much decided that you want to connect to Tor, you you've done the download and everything, you should at the end get something, some message that requests some information from you, asking you if you would like to connect or configure your browser, and then follow the instructions from then on to allow you to get Tor configured to work with your system. So pretty much on the website that I just showed you, you will have all the information that tells you in a stepwise process what to do. On Fireworld networks, as I talked about just a moment ago, and the fact that you might not be able to configure Tor to work with on these networks, what you can do is to download this via Gmail. So what you want to do is to send a message to these guys, and they have this information also on the website that I just showed you, that I just spoke about. And in the email, email body, just write help and then explain what you need if you want to. And then basically what will happen will be that they will send you a link to allow you to download and to install Tor. Once you've installed Tor, you want to check that you're actually browsing anonymously, because there's no point in installing Tor, right, just to find out that you are just browsing in the in regular mode. You can do this by checking, for example, on the Tor project, there's some way of checking, so you can click on this link, for example, and you should get a page that tells you something like this if you are not actually browsing using Tor. So in that case, you know that you're not browsing anonymously. Okay. In order to maintain privacy on Tor, you need to do things in the right way, right? So you need to abide by the regulations of Tor in order to ensure that you're browsing anonymously. You need to make sure, for example, that you're using the Tor browser, and that you need to be aware that Tor is only going to protect applications or web traffic that you have configured correctly to work with Tor. Okay. Avoid using browser plugins, because what happens is that they can upset the settings of Tor, and then that can lead to a complete de-anonymization. By default, they are typically blocked by Tor, but you want to avoid installing any other or any other browser plugins. Tor works nicely with Linux operating systems such as Tails and Unix. So if you're going to become really serious about using Tor, you might want to think about using a corresponding operating system. But you can use this on Windows, just bearing in mind that the way Windows is set up does not allow you to achieve maximum privacy even with using Tor. Keep an eye on the URLs that you visit, so make sure that you're looking at HTTPS links everywhere, or URLs everywhere that you're using them. And usually with Tor, what will happen will be that you will be encouraged, or you will find that it's much easier to use HTTPS URLs while on the Tor platform. Do not open downloaded materials while you're on Tor. So what you typically want to do is to, if you receive a file, for example, download it and have it on your system, and then when you've shut down the browser, then open up the file that you're wanting to look at, and if you have any response from the file that you have read, then reopen Tor to make your communication, but avoid reading the opened file on Tor. Okay, just because, as we talked about, a malware, if this is carrying a malware, the malware will likely be about de-anonymizing your communications on Tor, which you will not be aware of until you have shared some private information and found that it ended up where you were not expecting. Do not use things like torrent. Do not use Google's, Windows, RealMail, just because of what I said about the mechanism of Tor in general. Okay, so now that we've talked about that, what I would like to capture for you just before we wrap up is the actual mechanism that Tor uses to protect your data. So what happens is that if you have, for example, two users, say Alice and Bob, who are wanting to communicate information to each other, Alice has Tor installed, and typically she would have also encouraged Bob to have Tor installed on his system. What Alice will then do is to use the Tor network, which is basically a network of distributed computers that are all operating Tor-based servers, right? So what Alice does in the first step is to encrypt the data that she wants to send to Bob. So we talk about encryption in the next couple of lectures and how it works in general. Okay, so she encrypts her data and it goes, for example, to the first computer, which is A, on the network. Okay, and what A is going to do is to apply a second layer of encryption and then transfer this to another computer on the network, say B. B will apply a third layer of encryption and so on until the message arrives at the last computer on the network just before Bob, at which point all of the layers of encryption will be removed. Okay, so remember the onions that we talked about, onions in terms of the layers of encryption, and the fact that when the data arrives, for example, at D, what D will do is to peel off all of the layers of encryption, all of the onion layers, and then deliver the message to Bob. So what Bob will have the impression of is that the message arrived from computer Z, or that Alice may have been sending the message from computer Z, whereas in fact Alice is a far, far way away. In the reverse, what happens is that if Bob wants to reply to the message, then starting with computer, for example, Z, the second layer of encryption is applied as it was applied in the case of A, and so on, finding, for example, another route going through a different series of computers, and so on, going back to A, where the decryption happens to allow the message to be transferred to Alice. Okay, so in the next lecture, we are going to look, first of all, at automating privacy policies. And this is basically sort of futuristic because this doesn't exist currently, but I thought it would be something nice to look at in terms of what it would be like to say, I would like this sort of privacy policy applied, and to have it sort of happen based on looking at how you behave, for example, and how your friends behave. So personal information could also be used on in terms of social engineering to do good things for you and to protect the information that you have. Okay, so we want to remember that we talked about browsing in anonymous mode, the fact that this, because of bad behavior from certain users, raises suspicion, but that is a nice trick for using to protect your private information.